Please share where you're watching from and consider subscribing to the channel. I've lived with horses as long as I've had memories worth keeping. I learned to braid manis before I learned long division. By the time I could write a sentence, I was scribbling about trail dust and creaking saddles, and that little knot of pride you get when a skittish gelding decides you're safe enough to follow. Colorado raised me that way. Big sky, low fences, and the quiet fact that out here you share the evening with things that don't care who you are. Deer and elk were the background actors. They passed like extra thoughts at the edges of my rides. A ripple of tan through yucca, a knuckled antler catching sun, the nervous jackhammer of hooves on hardpan. Coyotes yipped and red foxes wrote cursive in the snow with their tails. The truly dangerous neighbors, mountain lions, black bears, kept their own schedules, usually opposite mine. I boarded my horses at barns tucked close to the back country where the road's thin and the lights go single and far between, and I never felt much fear going out at dusk. Horses are prey. They feel the weather of danger before it breaks. When Raj's ears were loose and swinging, when his breath came slow enough to ghost in the cool, I trusted that reading more than I trusted any flashlight. The winter had happened. The herds in our dry lot felt wrong first. Little things. A curt, snorting chain reaction in the dark when nothing obvious moved on the fence line. Draft crosses shouldering through quarter horses with panicked purpose. No squeals for dominance. More like everyone backing out of a room at once. My friend's mare turned up one morning with 3 narrow gashes along her flank, 2 more flayed scratches laddering her shoulder. The edges looked too tidy for barbed wire and too parallel for a cat. We found a slack panel in the old wire that crawled through the scrubby part of the lot and decided it had to be that. We needed a reason that one would do. The vet stapled and wrapped and told us how good horses are at inventing new ways to hurt themselves. We laughed because it gave us permission not to think about it. But then another gelding showed a set of rake marks on his haunch, fresh and oddly placed, like something low had reached up and grabbed. Then another horse, this time along the neck, as if something had walked alongside the fence and tested each animal with a cautious, single-handed swipe. The agitated nights stacked up. Elk that usually drew no more than an ear flick now popped the whole herd like a field of shaken soda. Raj would stand with his nose aimed at the field, nostrils flared, tail clamped. If I spoke his name, he'd toss his head and shake the bit like I'd tugged on his mouth from 10 feet away. We said dogs. We said cougar. We said hungry coyotes, maybe. But the marks were wrong and the tracks were, when there were any, confusing. Cloven prints stretched too long, then suddenly canine pressure, then nothing at all across a long swath of hard ground where there should have been at least one misstep. One evening I found a piece of black tail hair, as coarse as broom straw, braided into a twist of wire 4 strands up, too high for any of ours to catch without rearing. There was a resin of something dark on the bottom of the salt block, sticky even in the cold, and a flat, chalky smear along the cinder block where it stood as if a jaw had leaned and slid. December thinned the light to a ribbon. The night I can't forget came after a day that already felt stretched too tight. The air had a glassy ring to it. You could hear trucks from the highway 3 miles away, and the crack of a crow's wing startled me, stupid as that sounds. I drove up the long gravel tongue to the barn with the heater in my car wheezing, and my thermos rattling in the cup holder. As I passed the dry lot, headlights washed the horses into jittery shadows, tails flagged, heads high, the kind of movement that's all legs and white around the eye. "What is it?" I said out loud to nobody and rolled to a stop. At first it was nothing but negative space, the sense something blocked the usual starriness beyond the fence. Then the shape declared itself, standing in the middle of the back field like a statue someone had set down and walked away from. A buck, I thought. A big one. Way out of the dry lot, beyond the break in the rise. Even from the car I could feel it, that particular hush around large antlers. I put the car in park and leaned forward, hand on the dash. The thing raised its head. People talk about blood running cold as a figure of speech. For me it was almost medical. My chest tightened, and something sank under my ribs like a dropped stone. The eyes were wrong first. Too far forward, not the soft, glossy side-set watchfulness of deer. These were set to stare down a tunnel. They were too dark, as if pupil and iris were one, and they didn't catch my headlights. No green flash, no animal shine. Its face looked bared. Not furless, exactly, but the suggestion of muscle had been erased. The planes pushed out until you could count bones you shouldn't see. The cheek, the ridge above the socket, the hinge of the jaw like a knuckle. The skin over it seemed pulled, too tight, a suede stretched on the wrong frame. It was big. Bigger than any mule deer I'd seen, and wrong big for elk because there was no chest to it, no barrel. It looked starved and still powerful, like the lines had been redrawn by someone who understood anatomy but didn't respect it. And the legs, its front legs bent the way a dog's does, angling back at the joint instead of the delicate, springy hinge of a hoofed thing. Even in stillness, it felt jointed for a different kind of ground. We held each other, the way you do with a thing that's asked a question without moving its mouth. I could hear Raj banging a hoof against the fence behind me, a high, metallic, nervy sound. Coyotes yipped somewhere far off and cut themselves off like a joke that didn't land. My own car hummed and clicked. The heater fan breathed against my knuckles. I told myself to back up, to turn the wheel and let the gravel talk for me, but it was like being pinned by a nail through my coat to the wall. The buck tilted its head as if to move the glare away from its own sight line and took one stiff, breathtakingly silent step. Its nostrils didn't flare. Its ribs did, faintly, as if the breath were coming from a long way down a tube. Then it turned and ran. Not with the rolling, crown-heavy bound of a stag, not the diagonal, floating leap of elk. It bolted like a dog that's been told it is finally allowed to go, and the speed was wrong for the size. It took the little hill toward the road in 3 elastic strides, shoulder low, hocks kicking out, and disappeared as if it had found a seam to slip through. I realized I'd been whispering no, no, no to the dashboard. I put the car back in gear with fingers that squeaked on the shifter and drove past the barn to the far turnaround with my eyes jumpy on every fence post. When I got out, the cold hit the inside of my mouth with that iron taste that only comes when you've been scared hard. The dry lot fence ran a nervous line in my headlamp. In the wash of light, I saw a run of prints along the field's edge, shallow where the ground was frozen, deeper where the thaw had bled up. Some were cloven and stretched like someone had pressed a deer hoof and then pulled it before the dirt let go. A few were rounded and splayed, pads without claws, too long for any dog I knew. In 2 places, the prints overlapped in a way that made no sense unless you allowed the thing to change its mind about itself. Under the lowest strand of the field fence, there was hair caught, not horse. Dark, coarser than elk, and kinked at the end like it had been burned. Beside it, in the pale dust of frost, a single drop had frozen a thin ring around a darker center, brown-black, the color old pennies leave on your fingers. When I touched it, it flaked and left a smell like a butcher paper you forgot in the sink. I didn't ride that night. I put my hand on Raj's chest through the rails and felt his heart like a quick animal trapped inside a bigger, slower one. He pressed his lips to my sleeve and breathed hard. I told him he was good, that he had been very brave, the way you do with a horse because you feel stupid otherwise. He kept watching the hill. I'm a schoolteacher from Barry's Bay, which is a fancy way of saying I measure my year by bells and by Augusts. Every August I buy myself a long quiet with a canoe and a map of Algonquin that's soft as cloth at the folds. This time I picked Lake Lavier, not the best season for lake trout, but I told myself I'd jig deep and settle for the kind of silence you only get when the trail registers on your shoulders. Opiago to Dixon, the long grind of that portage like a run-on sentence, then the sudden spread of Lavier opening like a small sea to someone who's never seen the real one. The wind was up the day I arrived. Whitecaps scudded and bullied the bow, and even with my gear as ballast the canoe skated sideways if I let my mind wander. I found the northernmost site open, first time for everything, pitched the tent in the lee of the pines, double-checked the bear hang, and made a half-hearted attempt at fishing. The wind pushed me more than I wanted to fight, so I came in early and looked north, to the little nameless lake over the short portage. Maybe some panfish from shore would scratch the itch. The portage wasn't much, more of a shrug between rocks, but a marsh had swelled over the trail. I skirted it, boots picking up that cold vegetable stink you remember weeks later. The small lake was a pane of dusk. I buttoned my flannel and cast a small spinner, letting it swing and tick in the shallow. The first bite startled me, a perch, runtish, released, then the air changed. It went thin the way it does before a storm, except the sky was clean and already losing color. Crunching to my right. Not twigs, wet, deliberate weight on brush. Bear or moose, both of which deserve space. The problem was where it chose to put itself, between me and the ribbon of shore that would take me back around the marsh and the portage. I tried to make the adult decision and cut cross-country toward Lavier. It would be slower, thicker, but the lake is a compass you can trust. I took out my flashlight, thumbed it on, and let the beam crawl the black between trunks. 15 seconds in, another crunch behind me. I stopped. It stopped. I listened so hard I could hear the sleeve of my flannel rasp when I breathed. I took 3 steps. It took 3, close enough to feel the timing, far enough that the light didn't find eyes. I panned the beam and got the ordinary, bark, lichen, the flayed raw orange where a moose had stripped a sapling. No shine. No animal makes that much sound and leaves nothing to catch. Back off, I shouted, the anger in it mostly camouflage for the worry. The word came back to me a heartbeat later. Not echo. Wrong direction, wrong distance, pitched up like someone mocking me from a culvert. Back off. I lifted the light and hit the smooth side of a white pine. For a second I thought I'd just found pale bark. Then it moved, not the tree, the round of it peeking. A skull-smooth head with no ears, skin like damp paper, and 2 eyes too large even for the lack of hair. They didn't shine. They just took the light and kept it. The head slid back behind the trunk, and the crunching came fast, angled. I ran. There's not a smart way to run through Algonquin bush at dusk, only a lucky way. Deadfall grabbed my shins, spruce tips combed my face. The flashlight stuttered hard shadows, and then caught nothing but my own breath. I held the rod wrong, useless, more antenna than weapon, and I barreled downslope until the trees opened into that particular open dark that belongs to water. I turned left and followed the shore by reflex, tripping on rock lips, splashing shin deep, until my campsite was aglow on the needles. I didn't pack. I committed evacuation. Tent stakes ripped free like molars. The whole tent, bag, pad, sleeping bag inside, became a fabric animal I bundled and threw. I grabbed the food line with shaking hands and swore out loud when I realized I was wasting time. I left it, jammed my backpack and filter and the rest of the small life into the canoe, pushed off, and paddled like distance was a cure. Out on Lavier it was black enough that up and down felt negotiable. The wind had fallen, or maybe it was just different in the middle. I dipped the paddle and listened after each stroke. There were the sounds you expect, slap of water on hull, the far, sane laugh of a loon, and the ones you don't. A light tapping on aluminum, too regular for waves, like someone testing with a fingernail. The phrase again, softer now, farther, back off. It sounded like me when I'm trying not to wake a class and still need them to stop. Something bumped the stern gently, like a log rolling under. I froze the paddle midair. The canoe drifted and kissed something soft that yielded. I thumbed the light on reflex and sliced the beam across water and found, stupidly, the answer to my original trip. A half-chewed lake trout, the spine a white comb, the head gone. The light picked up scratches on the paddle blade I didn't remember, thin and parallel, as if a hand with 2 long nails had idled there. I didn't sleep. I trimmed the canoe to a drift that felt neither toward nor away. I watched the shoreline become nothing, then suggestion, then the gray shape of trees again. When the east had a seam of pewter, I turned the bow and went back for the thing I'd been foolish enough to leave hanging like a bell, the food. I came in hot, grabbed the rope, and shoved off again to the opposite shore where I could finally breathe and properly stow everything with fingers that obeyed. Daylight is an amnesty that shouldn't work and somehow does. The sight looked ordinary again, which felt like an insult. I walked back to where my panic had torn the tent free, and saw the little evidences you'd miss if you didn't already know to look. A smear of mud on the food bag that didn't match the soil, 2 parallel grooves on the portage sign at shoulder height, fingernail deep, and prints along the margin where my own boot marks from last night overlapped something else. They were spaced like a person's stride and wrong in a tiny way. The toes pointed a little too straight forward, as if the foot didn't understand the compromise a human gait makes with terrain. I paddled out, and I haven't been back to Lavier. People say the park isn't true wilderness, that the logging roads knit it into something smaller than it looks on a map. Maybe, but there are rooms in there with the door at the wrong angle, and if you say back off in the wrong room, something might learn your voice and decide it likes the fit. This happened just over a year ago. My dad took my siblings and me up to our cabin in the woods for a few days. Boating, quadding, badminton in the yard, the usual. It felt like every other trip until the last night, when the mood shifted and wouldn't shift back. Part of it was our own fault. We spent a good chunk of one evening swapping scary stories. Skinwalkers came up. Someone said that even mentioning the word draws them near. I laughed along at first, then couldn't stop thinking about it. That's how the feeling started, like a pressure in the room, not loud, just steady. I got paranoid enough to tell my grandma. I felt like something was out in the trees. She called me silly, poured herself some wine, and told me not to talk about things I didn't want to invite. That line stuck to my brain like burrs. Around 6, I stepped away from the board games. My family's loud when they have fun, and I wanted quiet. I went to the small bedroom we use and looked out the window just to look. The pines were dim and heavy, the shed a darker rectangle between them, the snow thin and crusted like a scab over the grass. I was about to turn away when I saw my grandma outside. At least, my brain grabbed the shape and said the word, Grandma. Same coat color, same patterned scarf. But something was wrong in a way my eyes knew before I could explain it. She was taller, barely at first, then obviously the longer I let the picture settle. Her arms hung too low, hands near the tops of her knees. She moved like she'd practiced walking the way we do, and still hadn't nailed the tempo. She drifted past the birches like a sleepwalker, then turned and stood by the shed. And then she just stayed. If you've ever watched someone pretend to be a mannequin, you know the difference between human still and store window still. This was the second kind. The head tilted, listening, but the shoulders didn't breathe. The scarf was tied wrong, too. The knot sat dead center on the throat like a lump, not off to the side the way Grandma always did. The longer I looked, the more details refused to line up. The coat sleeves ended short, showing wrists that were too pale, almost shiny like raw skin stretched over something. And when her hand brushed the shed door, it left a smear on the wood, greasy, like the mark your forehead leaves on a bus window. Someone laughed in the kitchen, my dad, big and easy. The sound broke whatever focus held me. I walked out, and there was my actual grandma at the counter, opening a second bottle of wine, sleeves pushed past her elbows, bracelets clinking. I asked, too fast and too loud, "How'd you get in here so quick?" She frowned like I'd told a bad joke. "I've been here the whole time." The bottom dropped out of me. I went back to the window at a run. My little sister followed, asking what I was doing. I pointed. We got there just in time to see a figure standing by the shed turn and run for the tree line. Run is the closest word, but it wasn't right. The legs tangled and then flung forward like they were new to each other. The arms didn't swing. They hung and then jerked. The head didn't bob. It was like watching a video that kept dropping frames. We said nothing. Not because we're brave, but because saying the wrong thing in that room, after the stories, with everyone laughing, felt like handing the thing a handle to grab. My sister squeezed my wrist hard enough to leave white marks. We went back to the table and pretended to care about a game about trains. I thought that would be it. The sighting, the scare, the lie that follows, must have been a neighbor. But night has a way of pressing until it finds what you're hiding. The tapping started after 10. At first I thought it was the stove settling, the way metal pops as it cools. Then it came again, not from the kitchen, from the window by the hallway. Tap, pause, tap, tap, longer pause, tap. Like fingernails learning a rhythm. No one else reacted. I froze in my chair until my dad joked about the wind and got up to throw another log on the fire. When he did, the tapping stopped. When he sat, it started. It felt personal, which was the worst part. In the bathroom, I found something that shouldn't have been there. The window is high and tiny, the kind of square you forget exists. That pane had a smear on it, too low and oval, like a face had pressed there from outside. There were faint lines through the grease, as if something toothy had grinned against the glass. I wiped it with toilet paper. The paper came away gray-yellow and smelled like pennies and wet dog. I flushed it and wished I hadn't touched it. Back in the kitchen, Grandma poured wine and laughed at a story my dad was telling. Her laugh hiccups at the second syllable. I've known that sound all my life. From the dark behind the shed, we heard it again. Same shape of sound, same rhythm, just a hair too late, like an echo that learned the trick and wanted a turn. No one looked up but me and my sister. We stared at each other and agreed without speaking. Do not say anything. Saying it felt like stepping into a chalk circle you can't step out of. I slept badly. Every time I drifted off, I dreamed of the shed door opening, of my grandma standing on the threshold, arms too long, the scarf not dead center on skin. At some point, someone tried the back door handle. It rattled gently, then stopped. I held my breath and counted past 200. When I finally got up, I found two things on the mat that made my stomach go hollow. One was a single long, curved thing that looked like a fingernail but thicker, the color of old ice. The other was a fork from the kitchen drawer, bent in the middle like someone had tried to tear it in half. Between two tines there was a bit of something the color of chewed gum. I told myself it was food. I took it outside with a bag and threw it in the trash can and tied the lid shut. Morning fixed the cabin, but not me. The sun made the yard ordinary. The shed was just wood. The smear on its door was a dry, faint oval now, almost gone unless you knew where to look. In the snow by the corner, though, were prints I couldn't name. Some looked like my grandma's boot tread, as if she'd walked there. Mixed among them, spaced wrong and angled strange, were places where something narrow had punched in as deep as a wrist and then lifted out. The distance between those points was too long for a normal step. If my dad had come out with me right then, I would have told him everything. He stayed inside making pancakes and whistling. The sound made the yard safe again, temporarily. We left that afternoon. On the drive home, I kept replaying the first moment, the grandma outside, and every time I did, a new small wrongness bubbled up. Her ear shape under her hair wasn't right. The coat buttons were on the wrong side. When she turned her head, the lower part turned last, as if the jaw had weight. I didn't tell anyone any of that. My sister and I promised not to say the word again, not in the woods. This is the first time I'm telling the story the whole way through. Call me insane, but I want to go back. Not alone, and not at night, and not with my mouth running. I want trail cameras up on the shed and by the kitchen window. I want a clean shot of whatever stood still enough to pretend to be my grandmother. I want the kind of proof that doesn't need me to narrate it. I'll bring new locks and brighter lights and fresh batteries. I'll bring chalk for the places that feel thin. And I won't say that word out loud. I learned that much. Some names are like knocking. Some knocks get answered. About a year ago, late November, maybe the first days of December, I took the sled out because that's what I do when the dark settles in. I ride until the engine heat gets into my bones and the forest feels like mine again. Where I live in Lapland, the sun doesn't bother climbing much that time of year. You get a gray blush for a few hours, then it's night again. I left early, while the gray still pretended to be day, with my hunting knife on my belt, my rifle slung, and an extra can of gas bungeed to the rack. I wasn't after anything in particular. Call it a loop I've ridden since I was old enough to steer. Out across the mires, through the black spruce, up by the low hills where, if you're lucky, the sky shakes with green stuff like curtains. 20 kilometers in, the smell hit me. I've gutted moose. I've come across wolves' leftovers, old cow carcasses thawing wrong in spring. Rod has a vocabulary, you learn it. This wasn't that. This was wrong enough that my throat tried to throw up just to get away from it. It had the iron of blood that's gone cold and the sweet sour of something turning, but underneath was a chemical note, like wet fur burned on a hot plate. I cut the throttle and let the sled idle, standing, helmet off, turning in place to find the wind. The smell was everywhere and nowhere. I walked a little ways into knee-deep powder with my headlamp off, so my eyes could do their job, and saw nothing but my breath and the white. When I got back on, the smell thinned out like it was ashamed of itself. By late afternoon I reached the spot I like, a small clearing, just a bald spot in the trees, enough room to see if anything came at me, but with a wall of dark around it that keeps the wind down. I checked the gas, lower than I liked, poured from the can, got a fire going from the dead birch I'd stashed there, and sat. There's a peace to winter fires. All summer's noise is packed under snow, and what's left is your own breath and the tiny birds that never leave. Even the sled, ticking as it cools, sounded like a friend. When the last of the gray drained away, I went to the edge of the trees with my headlamp and a hatchet to cut more kindling. That's when the smell came back. Not gradual. 1 second clean air, the next like someone had opened a door on the other side of the clearing and pushed a roomful of stink toward me. My eyes watered. The hairs in my nose curled from the heat of it that wasn't heat. I told myself it was a dead moose, early freeze, late find. I told myself a lot of things in a very calm voice that sounded nothing like the way my hands shook. The fire guttered low. I jogged back, fed it until the flames put a proper circle of light on the snow. Then I stood inside that circle and scanned the tree line, slow, the way you do when you'd rather see the bad thing with your own timing. Headlamp left to right. Spruce, jack pine, a snag like a man with his hands in his pockets. Nothing. Stark, a voice said from the trees, and my spine went to ice so fast it hurt. My cousin's voice. Posy. He was 100 kilometers away, home with his new baby, probably asleep on the couch with the TV talking at him. But the voice was right. It had the flat little laugh he makes at the end of my name, the way he has since we were kids. Stark, you there? Posy, I said, and hated the hope in my mouth. Snow talked softly somewhere. Weight on crust, not breaking it, then breaking it. I lifted the light and swept it. At the edge of the trees, halfway between two black trunks, something caught and threw a red pinprick back at me. Not the clean animal eyeshine you get from fox or hare, more like wet glass teased by a match head. I swung the beam back, and the red speck moved to keep out of it. My breath started to hitch. "Not funny," I said, and the trees gave me my own voice back, far away and close at the same time. "Not funny. Being a coward keeps you alive." I decided to go. I kicked snow onto the fire until the circle shrank, slung the rifle, started the sled, and swung a leg over. I had my glove half on when the snow behind me erupted in a savage, fast noise, and something got a handful of my coat and yanked me backwards off the machine like I weighed nothing. I hit the ground on my side hard enough to bounce. My headlamp canted, so the beam sliced up into branches and made the world look like ribs. Claws, or fingers, had the back of my jacket bunched. I felt myself slide, heels plowing a channel, the cold burning through the fabric at my shoulder blades. I beat at the grip with my fist, then remembered the knife and went for it, fingers idiot thick in the glove. When I got it free, I swung backward and felt the blade meet resistance. Not fur, not meat, something tougher and gelatinous, with gristle inside. I stabbed again. On the third strike, the grip loosened, and a scream ripped over me so loud it bent the air. I've heard cows in labor and women in labor, and bull elk bugling the rut on fog mornings. This was all of that in one terrible ribbon. It started low like a man whose chest is full of fluid, jumped into a woman's high panic, and landed in the trumpet of an animal that has never seen a human and doesn't care to learn the word. I rolled, scrambled, and threw the lamp where the sound had come from. For a second it cut through black and wrote a picture I wish had never been invented. Wolf-shaped but wrong in every joint, hair sloughed in patches so you could see tendon underneath, the mouth hanging and too long, the teeth set like a man's in the back but the front curving like tusks. One eye socket was just a hole rimmed with something wet and black that steamed in the cold. The other, higher, carried that match head red. It flinched back from the light and ran on 3 legs, one forelimb held into its chest as if I'd hit a nerve. It didn't gallop like a dog. It moved like a man trying to learn a dog's motion, and the snow didn't behave the way it should under it. I got to the sled with the stupid animal speed fear gives you. The engine was still running. I gunned it so hard the track fishtailed, and threw a rooster tail of powder over the gutted fire. I went too fast on a trail that narrow. Branches slapped my shoulders, something hard slapped my cheek, and the skin went numb. The speedometer kissed 80. Wind knifed through the neck of my coat where the collar had torn when I was grabbed. The screaming kept pace on both sides, nearer, farther, layered like bad choir. I locked the throttle so the sled would keep its idiot courage and swung the rifle up one-handed when I hit a straightaway. There, a dark body moving at my speed off my right, threads of hair lifting in my headlamp. I fired. The recoil pushed me a little offline. The dark shape didn't fall. The screaming on that side cut out like someone had unplugged it, and for a stupid hopeful second, I thought I'd hit. Then another scream braided in on the left, and I understood the count had never been won. They followed a long while. I don't know how long. Time in the dark goes ropey. The screaming stopped when the trees thinned and the flats opened, like they had a range, and I'd slid out of it. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I saw electric light where it never is. My own place, a single yellow square in the night. I killed the engine too close to the door, half fell off, and got inside with my boots on. I locked everything twice, slid the deadbolt, dragged the kitchen table to block the door because it made me feel like I was doing something. I woke in the chair with my coat still on, and my hands aching from holding nothing. The clock said 10:26. I went outside because men are fools and proof makes fools feel sane. The sled's back rack had 3 long gouges in it, 4-fingered, deep enough to catch a thumbnail. On the hook where the bungee had been there was hair caught, coarse, black, kinked like it had been singed at the tips. When I pulled it free, a scab came with it, dried and glossy. I threw up into the snow right there and had to watch it steam. On the front door, down low, were marks you don't want to see if you live by yourself. Taps at first, then longer furrows, then one confident score down the grain like a person enjoying the feel of a good knife in soft wood. I followed them up with my fingers and stopped when I realized I was touching the place where I had heard the handle jostle in the night. They knew where I lived. Maybe they had always known. Back in August of 2021, I started hanging with Nick and Belle because they were the only people who didn't mind how restless I get when the sun starts to thin in the evenings. We were the kind of bored that makes you do things for the story later. One afternoon we biked down to the old graveyard, a strip of fenced hill with stones that leaned like tired teeth, because it was 5 minutes from Nick's place and 5 minutes is close enough to feel like fate. They sat on a headstone from the 1800s like it was a park bench. I told them it was wrong. They laughed and bounced on it to show how wrong they could be. I felt something watching us from the shade where the grass never quite grew, and I said I wanted to go. We left. I didn't tell them that on the walk home I kept hearing our footfalls skip an extra beat behind us, like an invisible fourth friend trying to learn the timing. October poured into us like it was dared to. Abandoned houses. Truth or dare at midnight with more dare than truth. 3 a.m. challenges we found online that were supposed to open doors. Belle's older brother Chris was our librarian of bad ideas. Names of things you're not supposed to say, stories about what those names do when they hear you. He had this one word, said it was a native word for the thing that wears you to get close to your friends. He dared one of us to go into the woods and say it alone. No one wanted to be the solo idiot, so I said, together, and we all said it at once, mouths shaping something our tongues hated. For a moment, nothing. Then from the tree line came a sound of people talking. Our voices. Me and Belle, making small talk about nothing, the cadence exact, the pauses the same, like recording ourselves from earlier and playing it back through damp leaves. It didn't sound amplified. It sounded like two more of us in the dark, trying our sentences on. We bolted, laughing the way you laugh when you don't want to cry, slamming the door, locking it, and standing there with our backs to it like the wind was hands. In November, Mom needed her car picked up from a friend's place. We were buzzing on the idea of being useful at night. I drove because my learner's permit doesn't care if your hands shake. There's a back road with a ridiculous 45 miles per hour limit that everyone ignores. I was doing almost 70 because the road was empty and I wanted the feeling of outrunning something I wasn't ready to name. 3 deer stood at the edge of the ditch, heads high, like they'd been carved out of the night. One bolted across and I braked too late and felt that slow, syrupy time flood the car. The deer's shadow slid over the windshield and vanished. On the shoulder, the smallest one didn't act like a deer anymore. It lifted onto its back legs in a single awkward hinge and stood. My brain tried to file it under circus, because that was easier than wrong. Then it shifted, like the air decided on something else, and the shape fell forward and became a girl about our age with long blonde hair and teeth that looked like the sharpened ends of zip ties. She didn't run at us. She just smiled like she knew we'd take that home. We didn't talk for the rest of the drive. When we did, it was only to decide not to tell our mothers. February crept in and pretended to be spring. Chris and I went out to the field by the woods because courage grows like mold when you close the door and whisper to it. I brought a knife and a baseball bat and a GoPro that had seen more bike tricks than anything worth keeping. Chris had a BB gun and a headlamp bright enough to make trees flinch. We picked a bush and crouched. The cold got under my jeans and proofed my legs like bread. The field said nothing, the way fields do right before they decide to say too much. Then the sound started. Not one deer but a lot of deer, 20 maybe, running circles we couldn't map. They didn't bark or blow. They didn't stamp and pause like they do when they don't understand a thing. They pounded the ground as if something were counting them, and they wanted to be in whatever group survived. Their hooves clipped the frosted grass. You could hear tongues slap, too long, like they'd forgotten where mouths end. Then the sound above us, not in the trees but above them, wings. Not the quick percussion of a goose, not the awkward slap of a heron lifting. These were long pulls of air you felt in your lungs, as if something the size of a ceiling fan had learned to be an animal. We tilted our heads at the same time because the body knows when something large has taken position over it. I didn't film. I couldn't. My hand had turned into a piece of me I wasn't speaking to. Deeper in the trees, branches started breaking. Not the brittle hiss of twigs, the pop of fresh wood, green inside, being shouldered open. Something big was moving through at a human height, and the trees were making a narrowing sound like 2 people dragging furniture down a hall. "Daniel," Chris whispered. "We should." And then he didn't finish because we both saw the eyes. 4 of them, orange, set 2 and 2 at different heights, as if one pair belonged to something on a branch and the other to something underneath. They didn't glare. They watched. They blinked out and back and very slowly, not like eyelids, like passing behind ribs. We ran. There was no plan to it. The bush snagged my jacket. The knife jumped out of its sheath, and then, bless my panic, I tripped, and my hand found it again in the trampled grass. The sounds kept pace with us. The wings pushed air we couldn't see against our backs. The deer scattered, as if we were a rock thrown into a school of fish. At the field's edge I looked back because people in stories always look back, and I didn't want to be the story that didn't. My headlamp drew a line across the first row of trees. Standing there between two trunks was a woman in a white dress, dirty from the knees down, lace sagging with mud. Her hair was long and colorless in the light, and her mouth opened too wide, like a hinge had been added for the night. She screamed, a sound that began human and rose into a note that chewed on my ears, and she ran at us with a gait like she'd started as a quadruped and just learned how to hide it. Chris didn't shoot because BBs are for cans. I didn't swing the bat because there wasn't any of me left to swing. We sprinted. When we broke out onto the street, the sounds dropped away, all at once like we'd stepped out of range of a radio. We didn't talk until the house door was closed on our heels and locked and checked and locked again. 10 minutes later, I glanced out the window because my worst habit is checking the dark to see if it's still there. Up in the treeline were two pairs of orange eyes, patient as porch lights. It didn't end in that field. For weeks, knocks came at Belle's back door in the rhythm of our laughter from that day in the graveyard. A neighbor found a sapling peeled shoulder high, as if something with careful hands had tried to see what was under bark and then gotten bored. We found, in the ditch, a feather too big for anything that belongs here, the quill stained dark at the tip as if it had been dipped in a throat and forgotten. Sometimes at night, when the house is quiet enough to hear the fridge click, I hear two boys in the yard talking. It's me and Belle, but not. The sentences are almost right, but miss the slang we only use when we're tired, or bend the end of a word up when we would have let it fall. They're practicing us. They're getting better. I used to think the graveyard thing was about disrespect, that jumping on a stone calls something out of the ground. Now I think it was more sideways than that. We pressed our weight onto a name, and something noticed we were the kind of people who press. Later, when we said a word in the woods we had no right to say, we knocked twice. If you're waiting for the part where I tell you how to stop it, I don't have it. What I have is this: when a road says 45, don't drive 70 just because you want to outrun a feeling. When a word tastes like rust and lightning at the same time, don't say it again to prove you're not scared. If you hear your own voice call from the trees, keep your mouth shut. That's not denial. That's survival. 2 nights ago, my phone lit with a text from Belle. You outside? I answered no. I didn't look out the window for a full hour. When I finally did, the ditch across the street shivered like something big had just remembered how to be small. I closed the blinds slow, like loud would be a mistake, and turned my phone face down so if it lit with my own name it would glow against the table, not me. My dad's the type of man who treats fear like an insult. Marine Corps corrections officer, 6'2" and built like a doorframe. He has 2 gods he admits to, the one upstairs and the one with a harvest schedule. Ghosts, monsters, energy, all that? BS, he'd say, clipping the letters like he was cutting them with tin snips. That's how it was until Dayton. He was hauling through Ohio, long stretch, no patience for city traffic, so he peeled off the interstate and found a nowhere side road with a little turnaround tucked behind a line of trees. Warm night, clear sky. He slid a horse blanket into the truck bed, folded a pillow under his neck, and let the chirr of insects sand him down to sleep. The first bump woke him hard, metallic, not wind, like someone shouldered the side of the bed, right under his ribs. He sat up fast, breath held, saw nothing but standstill trees and 2 inches of moonlight on chrome. He waited. Nothing. Chalk it up to dream, to settling metal, to nerves he doesn't have. He lay back down. Second night, different lay-by, same routine. Same bump. This time it came in 3s, a patient shoulder to the bedside, pause, shoulder again, pause, once more. He sat up with a curse and the rust taste that comes when adrenaline cuts your tongue on the way out. The woods gave him cricket music for an answer. He scrubbed his face and said, enough, to the dark like he was a boss, and it was late. Night 3 he bought Monster Energy drinks and decided information beats courage. He had a little camera and a tripod in the cab. He set the tripod at the driver's side rear quarter where the bumps always found him, hit record, red light steady, climbed back into the bed, and told his body to pretend to sleep. Dawn is a time that knows how to lie. Everything ordinary again. So he didn't trust the feeling of safety when the black thinned to gray. He pulled the camera, climbed into the cab, and scrubbed to midnight, to 1, to 2, to the hour when even truckers lose the argument with their eyelids. At 3:30 a.m. exactly, the frame caught motion. Not a whole thing, just feet. They walked into view on the gravel shoulder and stopped flush with the truck's side. Bare feet, adult-sized, long and narrow, skin a sickly, under-wrist color, toes too even in length like they'd been cut to match. No ankle, no calf, no shin rising out of them, just feet, as if the rest of the body had been erased with a careful tool. They faced the truck. They didn't shuffle or sway. They held still for a long, measurable minute, then turned and walked out of frame, toe heel, leaving the gravel undisturbed in a way that looked like a trick until you looked again, and saw it was worse than a trick. It was truth. Dad replayed it without breathing, leaning closer until the pixels made the feed a mosaic. He checked the timestamp again. 3:30 a.m., bright as if the numbers wanted to be remembered. Night, for he didn't pretend to sleep. He parked farther from any light, under a roof of branches, told the mosquitoes to take a number, and sat in the cab with the seat back and the window cracked and the monsters lined up like a dare. He watched the dash clock chew minutes. At 1:15 a.m., he heard it, a walk coming from the trees, not fast, not furtive, like whoever it was had directions and didn't need to check them twice. Gravel whispered in a slow circle around the truck. He could map it by sound: front left, front right, tailgate, driver's side, pause. He felt the pause like breath on the glass. He looked up and saw something that would have made a younger man whisper a prayer and an older one forget the words. 10 feet, maybe more. Hair or fur like black hay left in rain. Shoulders crowding the edges of what his mind would allow. The eyes, the wrongest part, were red, not like LEDs but like coals that had learned to look back. It stood at the driver's side, close enough that if he'd exhaled harder his breath would have fogged the window between them. He shut his eyes once hard, because he's a man who tests reality even when it's bleeding. When he opened them, the shape hadn't moved. If anything, it had leaned, not forward exactly but closer to the idea of him. He says he knew, with that clarity you get just before an accident, that if he turned his head to the right, just a little, he would see it framed perfectly in the passenger side glass, its reflection sitting in the empty seat as if it had always ridden with him. So he didn't turn. He made himself a statue of breath. He counted past 1,000. He watched dawn start as a rumor behind the trees. And when the gray finally unstitched the black, the window showed him nothing but his own face and a smear of fog where his breath had been. He didn't ease out of there. He put the truck in gear and left like he'd remember later to feel stupid about it. Highway, then more highway, then the long straight sentence home. He told me the story that afternoon in the kitchen with his hands around a mug like it might jump. He didn't embellish. He didn't reach for words he doesn't use. He said, "I don't scare," and then, "Don't go to Dayton," and then nothing for a long time. I asked for the camera. He'd already erased the card. He said he didn't want it in the house. I pressed. He said, "Listen." He took me to the garage. On the driver's side of the bed, 2 long-heeled divots set far apart like something stepped up onto the wheel well and leaned in, and another set on the hood, faint, like an afterthought. On the wiper blade, pinched under the rubber, a tuft of hair like steel wool, coarse, black, kinked as if scorched at the ends. On the glass, barely visible unless you breathed on it first, the curve of a palm smear that dried to a flaky brown no rain wanted to wash away. When he cleaned it, the cloth came away with a thin, bitter smell like coins held too long. He says he doesn't believe in monsters. He says the world is the world. He also says, with no smile at all, that if I ever find myself on a back road near Dayton and the clock reads 3:30 in bright green, I should keep my eyes on the windshield, both hands on the wheel, and drive until the only red I see belongs to taillights. He doesn't tell this story to anyone else. He told me once. He ended it the same way he ends warnings about table saws and black ice. "You don't get 9 lives," he said. "You get what you get. Don't waste any of it turning around." Winter makes the neighborhood quiet enough to hear your own house think. That Saturday felt normal. My dad and sister were upstairs watching Christmas movies. I was in the basement on my Oculus, and the world was small and safe inside a headset. A buzz on my phone jerked me out of it. Unknown number. We're outside. I had to remind myself my Cleveland friends were down for the weekend. Chad and his cousin Emily visiting their grandparents nearby, Josh tagging along. I peeked out the front window, 3 silhouettes on the walk, shoulders hunched against the cold. I opened the door, and the weirdness of hearing their voices in real air instead of Discord made everyone awkward for the first 2 minutes. Then we did laps around the block, just to unspool the energy. They left at 8:30 to eat with the grandparents. An hour later, I laced up for the 2.5 my dad makes me run, even when it's freezing. Street lights threw long cones down the hill in my backyard, the kind of light that makes familiar trees look rehearsed. At the bottom where the grass tips into woods, a figure stood, 6 feet, maybe a little more. For a second I thought, Josh. I lifted a hand and called, "Hey." It turned toward me, and everything in it shifted. The outline cracked like someone wringing a towel, audible pops, one after another, shoulders buckling wrong, elbows unhooking, knees bending backward then forward until the shape stood taller and thinner than any of my friends. All the breath I had from the run vanished. I sprinted the last yard to the door, cramps detonating in my ribs, fingers slipping on the lock, heart punching like it had a flight to catch. I told myself don't say anything, don't give it a name to answer to. Dad asked if I'd finished. I nodded and went upstairs to bury myself in a monitor glow and teammates who don't need to see your hands shake. We gamed past 2. The only interruption was a bird hitting my window, one hard, hollow thud that made all 3 of us go quiet on the call. I slept a few hours, then woke to an empty house. Dad and my sister had gone to do something I can't remember because the night before had sanded the edges off my brain. 20 minutes later, Chad, Josh, and Emily came back. I told them what I'd seen. To my relief, they believed me. Chad said, "You remember the squirrel?" And a weird old memory flushed back, the albino squirrel we'd found 2 years ago, bright white with bead red eyes. It stared at us unafraid. Then its head twisted one way and the other, and kept going until it fell from the branch. When we ran to the base of the tree, there was blood stippling the snow and no squirrel. I had filed that day under dream, until Chad said it out loud, and I felt sick with how real it became again. Emily crossed her arms and gave us the look she gives when she's not buying it. We changed the subject. We decided to meet up later for VR, multiplayer rhythm game, everybody sweating in place. Josh and Chad vanished to their grandparents to grab their headsets. Emily lagged behind. "Show me where you saw it," she said, and because I am still a little in love with my worst ideas, I led her across the yard. The hill in winter carries sound weird. Each step made the same soft squeak. Each breath steamed and slid away. At the treeline, Emily pushed ahead, peering into the between places. I was about to say let's go back when figures slid out from the shadows 10 yards to our left and arranged themselves like they'd always been there. "Josh! Chad!" I called, relief and confusion colliding in my mouth, because I had just watched them leave to get their headsets. They stared but didn't answer. Their mouths opened slowly, like their jaws were on dimmers. Teeth showed, too many, too even, more like the ends of tiny white nails than teeth. "Jack, come here," Josh said, except it wasn't how he says my name. The vowels were right, the temperature was wrong. It sounded like someone pronouncing a word they'd only read. "Run," I told Emily low. We did. A scream ripped the air behind us, high, shredding, almost metallic. The chase sounded wrong too. Not sneakers on leaves, but a split beat, like hooves sewn to human feet. The cadence galloped, stumbled, corrected, learned. We crested the hill and almost collided with Josh and Chad, real ones, faces white, empty-handed. "What happened?" Josh asked. I turned to show them and saw the 2 figures at the treeline watching. Emily wasn't beside me anymore. She stood with them, and she was smiling in a way that used muscles a human face shouldn't prefer. Her head tilted left, left, then kept going, a slow spiral like the squirrel. The sound of vertebrae popping carried up the hill with the cold. We did not argue about what to do. We ran for the house and slammed the door and locked it. I put a chair under the knob, because movies sometimes get it right. "Emily's not with us," Chad said, breath sawtoothing. "She never came back with us." I didn't answer because my throat had closed to a straw. At the window we watched the trio below hold still as deer in high beams. After a minute they turned and melted into the trees without the sound of branches or brush, a quiet that felt more intentional than stealth. When it seemed safe, we cut through the yards to the grandparents' place. Josh grabbed a kitchen knife on our way out, because knives are talismans even when they won't help. We had been inside a minute when the front door swung, and Emily breezed in with Starbucks. She stopped. "Why do you guys look like you saw a ghost?" We talked over each other, and none of it made a clean sentence. She set her coffee down with a paper scrape sound and said, "Okay, but I swear I saw someone that looked exactly like you, Chad, by the car. Too tall. Face burned?" He stared at me through the window all the way down the street. Chad went sheet white. They left early. The house felt too quiet after. I stood at the back door long enough to notice small wrong things. Ash-smudged fingerprints on the mailbox at a height that didn't fit any of us. A strip of something stiff and pale snagged on the fence like deerskin, but hot to the touch as if it remembered a fire. Two sets of prints in the frost that alternated, shoe tread, then a clean oval like a hoof, then tread again, as if copy and original were arguing about how to walk. We told our friend Adam later. He believed us, said something had stood in his yard, and called to him in his little brother's voice, syllables correct, comfort missing. It's been weeks. My phone still lights up sometimes with a text from an unknown number. You outside? I turn the screen face down. When I finally look out the window, the ditch beyond the hill is always calm, the trees pretending to be trees. But now, when I hear my name in the backyard, I don't answer. I count to 100 and listen to the silence where hoofbeats might learn to be feet again. My grandpa tells stories like he's field dressing a deer. Steady hands, no wasted motion, a little blood on the floor if you're squeamish. He's a country man in Washington pine, voice dipped in the south, and that autumn night on the porch he stared into the tree line like it still owed him an answer. Son, he asked, you believe in the supernatural? Not that I know of, I said, and he nodded like he expected that. Then listen. He was younger then, doing a 5-day solo hunt up past the logging spurs. Lever action across his back, packed tight, camp stashed where the wind curled, but didn't bully. First morning was fine, tracks old as stories, birds talking, squirrels arguing. By noon of day 2, the woods hollowed. Birds shut up. Insects dimmed like a lamp. A smell moved in, rot sweet enough to coat the teeth, iron like pennies on the tongue, and under it a chemical singe. What wet hair smells like if you lay it on a stove. He said it stayed with him not like a scent, but like a thought. He drifted into a stand of fur and found a cave mouth he didn't like. Bears get caves, men with sense keep walking. He did. The smell walked with him anyway. Then came the talking, low at first, a murmur like creek gossiping stone. He froze. Made it out, John. He told me his name sounded like it came from his wife Jess's throat. She wasn't there, she couldn't be there. The voice cracked on the J just like she does when she's tired. Help me, it said. I'm hurt. He is not an idiot, my grandpa. He is also a husband. He took 2 steps toward the voice and the world went bright, and then dark from behind. Blunt pain at the base of the skull, knees gone. The woods swallowed him. He came back to himself in cold so complete it felt wet. Phone screen lit a square of world, weak blue, enough to see the cave walls breathing with his lamp. Limestone slicked with something more than water. His palms came away with a greasy gray smear that smelled like old tallow. He pushed up, hands hit bone. At first he thought he'd found a rock. Then his thumb found the hollow of an eye socket, and the shape said friend in the worst possible way. Human skull. He flung it, and it clattered against more skulls, a clack like teeth chattering. The floor was drifted in bones the color of tea from seep and age. Ribs like boat ribs, femurs like clubs, scapulae stacked like plates. Not all animal. Not all old. NSFW. A length of spine still held together by sinew lay near his knee, the cartilage glossy like someone had licked it. A child's sneaker, blue and muddy, was tangled in a tatter of something that used to be a shirt. In one corner, a deerskin hung half-peeled from a nail, the membrane stringing like egg whites, flies winter slow in the cold but there anyway. The stink was a live thing, sweet, copper, sour milk, and the ammonia burn of old piss. Then came the sound. A skewer of a scream slid through an elk bugle. It came from the tunnel mouth. Heavy footfalls followed, the scrape of claw on stone, a weight that made dust jump in his phone's light. He found the rifle by touch, blessed metal, and crabbed behind a tooth of rock as the thing came in. He said his phone washed just enough light over it to give his dreams a blueprint. Thin like famine, long in the wrong places, forearms too much reach, hands with old man knuckles and nails like horn. Skin gray where it wasn't bald, hide in patches where skin should be, hair sloughed in ropes that stuck with black grease. A bony suggestion of a tail dragging, leaving a wet stripe on the stone. The head looked borrowed, the front of a deer skull jammed onto something that used to be human, canines pushed down in the front like tusks, a second row of human teeth farther back for grinding. Antlers, not proud, not symmetrical, just bone growth gone mean. The eyes weren't eyes so much as coals set deep, banked and mean and moving. It sniffed the cave the way a man sniffs stew, faint pleasure, patience. When it moved, its joints clicked like bead chains. It stepped near the rock he hid behind and leaned, breath of freezer-burned fog that tasted of carrion and pennies. He aimed center mass and fired. The muzzle flash turned the cave into a bad photograph, and the thing howled like it had never learned to stop. It hit him before the lever could cycle. Weight, wrong and enormous, drove him down, the rifle skittering to bone country. Its hand pinned his shoulder. The nails punched cloth and bit skin, hot threads of blood running under his shirt with the clean burn of new cuts. The mouth opened and the stink hit him full, meat left in a bucket, bile, something spoiled sweet like fruit. He did what men do when they do not plan but are not yet dead. He reached for the nearest weapon. The nearest weapon happened to be one of its own teeth. The thing had leaned so close that the lower tusk scraped his cheek. He clamped his fist around it, braced a boot against its chest, and yanked. The socket let go with a wet pop that sprayed his face with something warm and dark. He said it felt like syrup on skin, sticky, too slow to be blood until you smelled it. The creature reared, shrieking. He jammed that ripped tusk into the nearest soft thing, the eye. It took both hands. He felt jelly give, a membrane tear, the tooth sink until it ground on bone. NSFW. Thick, tarry blood crawled over his knuckles and cobwebbed his wrist hair. A ribbon of clear vitreous trailed like egg from the busted socket. The thing thrashed, antlers gouging rock, horn on stone screaming sparks. He stabbed again. Again. The third time the tooth bottomed and the scream guttered, turned into a wet gargle. Body weight went slack over him in a spill of ribs and angles. He lay under it, crushed by stink and silence, heart beating a drumline in his throat. When he shoved free, his hands left prints in the stuff leaking out of it, black-brown, thick, already tacky. He found the rifle, racked it with hands that barely knew him, and put another round into the skull for the part of his brain that craves punctuation. The cave answered with a flat slap of sound, and then only his breath. He backed toward the mouth, shaking, phone light catching details his mind would spend years trying to misplace. Bite marks on a femur that matched human dental arc, fingernail scrapes in stone, a ring, plain gold, glued in fat to a palm-sized smear of hide. He made camp a rumor. Rolled gear like a thief, left what wasn't already in his hands. The world outside the cave was cold air that tasted like birth. He walked until walking turned into the kind of shuffle men do when their boots lie about comfort. Then he walked more. When he got home, Jess opened the door and took one look at him. Mud and blood lattered up his shirt, a swollen knot on his skull, eyes hollowed out, and said nothing, the good kind of nothing. She cleaned him soft. He told it all. She believed the part that mattered. On the porch that night, to me, he reached into his pocket and set something in my palm. A curved piece of bone, root ragged, tip honed by use, his trophy and his proof. It was warm from his body and greasy still, no matter how many years he'd rubbed it clean. A hair, coarse, black, was caught in a crack along the side. I tried to give it back. "You keep it," he said. "Not to brag about, to remember." "Remember what?" He looked at the trees, and his voice came low. "Don't follow voices in the woods, even ones you love. Don't ignore the quiet when the woods get it all at once. And if you smell pennies and sweet meat together, you turn around, son. You don't bargain. You don't explain. You leave." I took the night shift at the repeater on Ridge 7 because I like machines more than people after midnight. The tower sits above the county like a tuning fork jammed in the mountain, red lights blinking at a heartbeat pace. When storms blow trees across the back roads, our radio is the only voice that carries. That night a dry wind pushed through the poplar leaves like paper. Power was fine, sky starched clear. I parked where the gravel dives into weeds, unlocked the chain, and shouldered my tool bag through the gate's bite. Inside the chain link the air felt thin, like I'd climbed higher than I had. Moths made halos around the service light on the shack, the night's only gold. My grandma's voice arrived uninvited. "Don't whistle at night." She said it 100 times for reasons she wouldn't explain. I never listened. A tune just rolls out sometimes when you're alone with work. I caught myself whistling between my teeth as I opened the panel, 3 notes from an old TV jingle, and snapped my mouth shut like I'd bitten a wire. Something whistled back from the trees. Not loud. Not close. Just the same 3 notes, spaced wrong. Like the sound had detoured through another throat and come home with a limp. I laughed the way you do when a dog jumps, and you pretend you meant to startle it. I popped the cabinet, swapped the filter, checked the fans. The ordinary work steadied my hands. The handheld radio on my belt crackled. "Ridge 7 copy?" The voice was mine. I froze enough to feel my pulse in my teeth. Static. Then my voice again, shy of breath. "Don't look." I didn't move for a count of 30. The repeater hummed its perfect hum. Past the fence lined the woods, pretended to sleep. I stepped to the fence with the service light at my back, which is either brave or stupid depending on who's telling it. The trees start 20 feet from the wire. In that open strip the weeds grew knee-high, seeded with milkweed silk that made the dark look dusty. Something stood at the far edge where the weeds break into fern, watching. The shape was deer at first, the slope, the carriage, the weird politeness of how it held itself. Then the lights got into the eyes. Deer eyes catch light on the side, a green-yellow shine that makes them look bulbous and harmless. These were two black wells set forward, like a person's, and the light only deepened them. The body underneath had forgotten to be a body. It was starved at the wrong places and heavy where it should be light. The front legs bent not delicate, but backward like a dog's, jointed to spring. When it shifted its weight, I heard the weed heads brush fur, and a sound like knuckles popping one by one. The wind carried a smell that didn't belong, wet pennies and sweet rot, hair singed on a hot plate. I thought of the not deer stories kids whisper online, and the way game wardens talk about sick animals, brain eaten slow by some misfolded thing, drooling, unafraid. I wanted it to be that, ugly and tragic and natural. Then it blinked, once, too slow, the lids meeting like someone learning how to close an eye. "Don't look," my radio whispered in my voice, second warning closer. I backed to the shack door. The thing in the weeds didn't follow with its feet. It followed with its head, like my movement pulled a string. I killed the service light. Darkness erased the weeds, and left only the red tower beacons stepping the sky. When my pupils widened, I saw that there were two more shapes at the edge now. Not deer. Not people. Arranged like a sentence I didn't want to learn to read. The fence rattled gently. A hand, not a hoof, a long-fingered hand the wrong shade of pale, curled over the top rail, and then withdrew as if the metal had burned it. The chain link thrummed like a struck string. Something tapped the shack window behind me. Nail on glass. A counting rhythm, the kind you keep when you're timing your own heartbeat. I told myself to get in the truck. I told myself to quit the job. What I did was open the door and step inside the little cinderblock room, where the rack lights paint the walls red and green like submarine veins. The tapping moved with me. Window, then door, then the pane in the back that faces the tower's legs. I swung my light in a panicked arc and caught only my own face doubled in glass, pale and damp. The radio hissed. "Come on," my mother's voice said from my belt. "You there?" She never calls me that. I lifted the handheld like I was holding a snake by the tail and clicked transmit. "Who is this?" My voice broke and the radio gave me the same break back, a little too pleased to own it. Outside, the weeds shivered as if something big had just remembered how to be smaller. The smell thickened until the back of my throat wanted to gag. The tapping stopped. Footfalls learned the ground, heel-toe, heel-clop, heel-toe like two gates arguing about the right way to come forward. The fence wire sang once more, and then fell weirdly quiet, the kind of quiet that means sound is being kept somewhere else. I reached under the bench for the first tool with weight and found the breaker bar. The cold of it steadied me more than anything else had. I cracked the door to the smell full on and stepped back out because the only way through a bad night is through it. Under the tower, the gravel looked like a lake. The three shapes stood just past the fence, heads at different tilt angles like owls considering a mouse. The middle one lifted a foot, a person's foot, narrow and long, toes weirdly even, and set it down in the milkweed with great care. Then it lifted the other forelimb and found only the idea of a hand, fingers too many, nails sickle thick. It set those down too. When it breathed, the breath made threads in the cool air. The threads folded wrong. "Don't look," my own voice said in my ear, kind now, the way I talk to panicked callers. I closed one eye, then the other, then opened them on the fence itself, not beyond, and did math. 20 feet, then 10 if it cleared the wire. The gate was open, the truck was 30 yards, the world was suddenly mapped by stupid distances. The left-hand thing leaned. Its face came out of the dark and wasn't a face, not fully, jaw too heavy, cheek too thin, teeth set like little white nails driven into gum. It opened its mouth too wide and let out a sound like someone trying on a scream for the first time. The others answered with a squeal of breath at the top of the throat. The radio answered with me gasping. I thought of Grandma again. Don't whistle. Don't name. Don't answer. Keep your eyes where they belong. So I fixed them on the gate latch, which had turned sideways in my fear, and I ran for it. The breaker bar felt like a live wire in my hand. As I passed the fence, something reached through the diamonds and caught my sleeve. The fabric tore with a zipper sound, and something warm and thick finger-painted my forearm. I didn't look. I hit the gate with my hip, almost fell right it ran. The weeds hissed. A hoof, no a foot, hit gravel behind me and slipped, and the clatter gave me 5 steps gift. I got in the truck and locked it and started it and screamed once, short, just to get the bad air out. The headlights smeared the fence. For a second all three stood plain as photographs, dog-bent forelegs under starving chests, heads wrong with teeth, eyes shut against the light like a person's. Their skin had places where hair clung in tarry ropes, and their hands, God, were wet to the wrist with something that strung like egg white when they moved. One lifted its arm and let the nails comb the chain link slowly, loving the sound. Another cocked its head as if listening to the engine idle, then replicated the sound back at me, pitch perfect, too quiet. I drove. Not fast enough to ditch the road. Fast enough to make the red tower lights fall behind. At mile marker 23 I realized I was still holding the breaker bar. My arm stung. In the dome light the tear in my sleeve showed 4 narrow tracks that had already darkened. The edges tidy like claws had been sharpened on glass. The cab smelled like pennies. I rolled the window down, and the night blew and clean. I didn't go back before sunrise. When I did, the weeds showed a weird compromise of prints. Sometimes the neat ovals of hooves, sometimes bare, long-toed ovals that ruined the neatness. In the dust on the shack window, someone had exhaled a circle and pressed their mouth there, leaving a faint ring of something greasy. The fence wore a clot of black hair kinked and brittle like it had tried to remember fire. I've worked the night rotation on a flatbed out of Wythe County long enough to know the faces of things that end up on Tulane blacktop. Deer, tires, ladders, the occasional refrigerator that learned to fly. You learn to read headlights for intent, and you learn that most of what scares people at 2 a.m. is loneliness with a soundtrack. I'm not the jumpy type. I'm methodical, cones, triangles, chalk the tires, winch slow, tie down twice. Dispatch pinged me at 104, disabled sedan, shoulder of the frontage road just past exit 14. Driver already hitching, left it with hazards, no bodies on scene. I rolled out, amber bar straubing clean. The sky had that heavy Appalachian dark that sits on your hood like a hand. Past the last gas station, radio chatter died down to the hum of my alternator and the click of the hazard switch I always forget to cancel. The first get worried thing was the deer. They're everywhere, you steel yourself for them. But this one didn't try to cross or dart. It stood in the center of the lane 100 yards ahead and watched me come. I eased the truck down to a crawl so I wouldn't make chum out of someone's buck, eased the wheel to give it space, and it held my lights. Deer eyes should glow from the side and make them look dopey. This thing's eyes were forward. The light sank into them instead of bouncing back, like 2 wells dug too deep. Its chest looked wrong, starved and heavy all at once, and the front legs bent like a dog's, angles that belonged to meat eaters, not grazers. When I was 20 feet out, it blinked slow like a person trying the motion on, then turned without the little hop deer always do, just pivoted smart and slipped off the asphalt. I coasted the truck a good 50 yards before my hands admitted they'd been squeezing the wheel. Not deer stories call out forward-facing eyes and a wrong, predatory gait. That's exactly how it felt. How stuff works. EastTennessean.com. The Oceana Echo. The sedan sat dead on the shoulder ahead, hazards dutiful. I threw my bar on, set cones, and gave the car a once-over. No plates, stolen or temp tag peeled. Driver's window down 2 inches, seats empty. A cheap air freshener twisted from the rear view, and the cabin smelled like apples over old coffee. I went back to the bed controls, dropped the deck, and set the winch hook on the lower control arm. Something whistled, 3 notes, from the drainage ditch. My grandmother hated whistling at night. "Don't call what you don't want," she'd say, and swept my hand when I tried. Superstition sticks even if you laugh at it. I put the hook down slow and told myself it was wind through a culvert. I clicked my handheld. "Unit 27 on scene," I said out of reflex. The radio on my vest crackled with my own voice. "Copy. Unit 27 on scene." Exact cadence. Exact rasp I get when I've been quiet too long. I frowned and checked I hadn't double-keyed. The radio hissed once and fell back to the repeater's hum. Voice mimicry is a thing in a lot of the online accounts. It's always your name, your friend's voice, your own words, played back a half beat off. Reddit. +2. Reddit. +2. I set the winch, and the sedan began to slide, tires squealing that rubber-on-steel complaint. The culvert gave me the whistle again, same 3 notes, slower, like it was trying to match my breath. I thumbed the bar brighter and swept my work light across the ditch. Eyeshine is a liar. It makes possums royal and cats demonic. But the beam found no coin glow at all, only skin pale, hairless, a long-fingered hand splayed on the wet lip of the culvert before it withdrew as if the concrete scalded. The weed heads shivered in a line as something big moved just out of the light. "Dispatch," I said, because doing the ordinary thing keeps you human. Unit 27. Unknown animals in the ditch. I'm gonna expedite. My radio answered me back in my dispatcher's voice, soft and calm. 10-4. Don't look. It wasn't her words. It was her sound, the comfort she uses with rookies. The hairs on my forearms stood up like iron filings near a magnet. I tightened the winch with the kind of care you save for glass. The deck's ratchet clacked like a heartbeat. From the trees opposite the shoulder came footsteps that couldn't make up their mind. 4 beat like hooves, then heel-toe like a man in boots, then the light, dry run of a deer. They stopped exactly where the brush met the mowed shoulder. Nothing showed. The smell did, copper and wet fur with a chemical edge, like hair singed on a hot plate. I carry pepper spray for dogs and a breaker bar for lug nuts and idiots. I set the bar where my hand would find it without looking. The sedan's rear tires kissed the roller. "Come on," the radio said in my own voice, right against my ear, like I'd leaned in to tell myself a secret. Come on, come on. I made a choice then that felt like stepping out of a bad dream. I stopped looking for it. I looked at my hook, my strap, my chain pockets. I yanked the car up the last foot, threw the safety in, and started the tie-down like a drill. Over my left shoulder something tested the air with a thin, pleased sound, and the weed line bent as if a head tilted this way and that. When I duck-walked past the driver's door to cinch the front strap, the window completed its 2-inch drop with a soft rubber sigh. A smell came out like pennies left in milk. On the glass near my face was a greasy oval where a mouth had pressed, and inside the oval, faint but there, were lines like teeth that had tapped experimentally. I stepped back slow. The hair on my knuckles prickled. I got the chains on. I stowed the hook. I rolled the deck up, and the sedan thumped into place with a sound that made me want to cry with relief. I didn't run for the cab. I walked. I got in, locked the doors, put it in drive, and eased out as if there were a trooper watching for Sloppy. The ditch gave a last gift as my bumper passed it. A shape unrolled from the culvert's shadow and stood. It had the height of a man, and the front half of a deer, and the hands of something that learned our tools. The head was wrong, jaw heavy, cheek gone. Tooth rose like little white nails driven into pale gum. The eyes shut tight against my lights like a person's eyes do. It opened its mouth too wide and tried my whistle back at me. 3 notes, perfect, too quiet. I didn't floor it. I drove like I had a car on the bed and pride in my work. When the mile marker ticked past 14 again in my mirror, the radio breathed and said in my dispatcher's voice, 10-8-27? I keyed up. 10-8, I said. En route back. No echo. No mimic. Just the repeater's ordinary click. Back in the yard, I did the paperwork with hands that wouldn't quit buzzing. I pulled the dashcam card and listened to the clip because you can't sleep with a maybe. The video was what you'd expect, cones, hazards, my dumb orange back, but the audio caught one clear thing. My own voice saying copy. Unit 27 on scene. At a time stamp 15 seconds before I actually spoke. The second time, the real one, overlaps the first, a half beat off like 2 singers trying to find harmony and failing. I filed the ticket as abandoned vehicle and wrote nothing else. What would I write? Don't whistle? Old folks around here say that anyway. Night whistling is a common don't across a lot of traditions. Folks say it calls what you don't want. Mysteriesofcanada.com. Maudlin House. Echoes of Appalachia.